Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
And we saved the lives of those hostages. And for me, I'm satisfied with that.
2 years after a hostage-taking at a Vancouver Island bank left 2 suspects dead, the police officer who led the response looks back and forward. Plus, 2 people are killed in a crash in West Vancouver. Police say one car was going in the wrong direction on Highway 1. And
we have already seen some new fire starts.
despite the recent rain, BC's emergency minister says drought is still a major concern in the Northeast.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Friday will mark 2 years since 22 people were taken hostage in a bank in Saanich. That ended in a major shootout with police killing 2 suspects. But all the hostages made it out alive and unharmed. As Michelle Gassoub reports, the officer who led that response that day is reflecting on his recovery and the lessons learned.
June 28, 2022. Victoria Police Sergeant John Musico and 6 members of his tactical team got the call. 2 gunmen had taken 22 people hostage inside this Bank of Montreal. They had just moments to react.
I've had a couple of minutes worth of time to drive to the bank, and now I've had 60 seconds worth of time to develop a plan and respond to 2 armed gunmen exiting a bank.
The gunmen approaching the officers were brothers Matthew and Isaac Ochterlony. An RCMP investigation would later find they had no plan to steal money. Their goal, kill as many police officers as possible.
When we end up starting the takedown, one of the suspects ends up turning really quickly and starts shooting at us. So his rifle's coming up, the van starts taking fire. And from that point, I can see my life basically like flashing before my eyes.
Musico shot his pistol directly through his van's windshield at the suspects. The shootout, captured on cell phone video, lasted 26 seconds, leaving 2 gunmen dead and 6 responding officers injured.
I was shot. 5 of my closest friends, who I also am responsible for supervising, have now been shot. 3 of them have catastrophic, life-threatening injuries.
The officers were cleared of all wrongdoing in the deaths after a report from BC's police watchdog found they faced unbridled violence from the suspects. Musico was shot through his right foot.
Regardless of who they are or what their intentions were or what their actions were, they most likely have family members that love them or care for them. And those family members have now lost somebody.
He says the trauma of that day has lingered longer than his injury, but he'd do it all again.
We fulfilled our service that day, and we saved the lives of those hostages. And for me, I'm satisfied with that.
Investigators also concluded if Musico's tactical team hadn't been near the bank that day, many more lives could have been lost. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
West Vancouver police say they are now trying to figure out how and why a car traveled in the wrong direction on Highway 1 before a deadly crash late last night. Police say a vehicle was heading east in the westbound lanes of Highway 1 near Westport Road when it crashed head-on into another vehicle just before midnight. 2 people were killed, while 3 others were rushed to hospital with serious but non-life-threatening injuries. Police say alcohol does not appear to be a factor, but they're not saying much about how they think that one vehicle ended up going the wrong way.
The circumstances that led up to that continue to be under investigation. Because of the significance of this event, we want to be absolutely certain that when we release what we believe to be a clear picture of the pre-collision events, that they are accurate.
Westbound traffic was closed at Westport Road for hours, blocking travelers heading to the Horseshoe Bay Ferry Terminal. BC Ferries delayed its 6:30 a.m. sailing from Horseshoe to Departure Bay in Nanaimo because of crew shortages due to the crash, and it expected other sailings to be delayed as well. Drive BC says the highway reopened westbound just before 9 a.m. TransLink says it is unveiling what it calls a series of, quote, efficiency measures to address a funding shortfall. It says that could eliminate 35 jobs and increase fare enforcement that could add up to about $90 million a year.
And the savings that are going to be realized are of a significant magnitude. $90 million is not a small amount of money. And that will really assist us in terms of closing the funding gap, but also, again, I think showing the public that we have taken a very hard look and made some difficult decisions.
TransLink says it's dealing with a drop in fuel tax revenue and fares priced below inflation, while it also faces higher costs for labor, fuel, and maintenance. Nearly 600 people with breast cancer or prostate cancer in BC have received radiation therapy in Bellingham, Washington since the program was announced last May. As Katie DeRosa reports, critics say relying on American medicine is an indictment of our cancer system.
When Richard Miro's doctor told him he would get faster treatment for his prostate cancer south of the border, the 66-year-old jumped at the chance.
She asked me how I felt about going to Bellingham. You know, and because the waiting list, I guess, was very long in Vernon or down that way for getting treatment. I said, well, let's go down there and get that done.
The elder from the Fort Nelson First Nation got 20 rounds of radiation over 4 weeks in February. Miro is one of the more than 600 patients who have traveled to one of 2 Bellingham cancer clinics for radiation therapy in the last year. Health Minister Adrian Dix says sending patients to Bellingham has reduced the waitlist size for radiation therapy in BC by 24%. He acknowledged, however, that more needs to be done. He says BC Cancer is hiring more oncologists so patients can be seen faster. While more people are receiving radiation therapy within the 28-day clinical benchmark, BC continues to have one of the longest radiation wait times in the country. That's unacceptable, says BC United's health critic, who noted the province has gone from having one of the best cancer care systems in the country to one of the worst.
It is very alarming to look at the circumstances in British Columbia today.
Miro said despite the 10-hour journey to Bellingham, he has no regrets about his decision.
To go through that and to have so many nice people, you know, behind you and going, you know, treating you like you're a person instead of just a client. It was just uplifting, like your spirit was uplifted.
Paul Adams of the Rural Health Network has been pushing for rural and remote cancer patients to have equal access to faster treatment in Bellingham. But he says the long-term goal should be getting treatment closer to home.
Shipping people out of province is not an intended long-term consequence.
CBC News asked BC Cancer and the Health Ministry for a breakdown by health authority of the 599 patients who received treatment in Bellingham. Those figures were not provided by Deadline. The BC government has budgeted $34 million a year for the program. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
Premier David Eby and his wife, Dr. Kaylee Lynch, have welcomed a new addition to their family. Take a look. In a post on X, the Premier says their daughter, Gwendolyn K. Eby, has been born weighing 9 pounds, 6 ounces, happy and healthy. Eby thanked the nursing and hospital staff for their amazing work. He says Gwen's name comes from her great-grandma, a longtime Victoria resident who was born on the prairies. Best to them. The Federal Universal Dental Care Program is expanding to include children under 18 and people who receive the disability tax credit.
This means that a family who's having to make that choice about whether or not they pay groceries or they get the oral health care that's preventative for their family, they don't have to make that choice anymore.
Ottawa estimates 1.2 million more people will now be able to apply for the program. As we mentioned, children under 18 now qualify, along with people who get a disability tax credit. Those groups join people 65 and older who were covered in the plan's initial rollout. To qualify, you will need to be a Canadian resident with an adjusted net income of less than $90,000, and you can't have access to dental insurance. You'll also need to have filed your tax return in the previous year. Some critics say basing eligibility for those with disabilities on the tax credit leaves out a lot of vulnerable Canadians. But Ottawa says they will be covered when the program expands further next year to include all remaining eligible Canadian residents. Food and beverage workers at Vancouver International Airport spent the day on a one-day strike. That work stoppage comes after bargaining with their employers broke down. As Saurabh Sandhu explains, this strike is another in a series of job actions that YVR has seen in the last few years, centered around fair living wages.
When do we want? Contract! When do we want it? Now! Dozens of workers picketed outside YVR's international arrivals Thursday morning, demanding fair wages. We'll never be defeated! These workers belong to a union representing some of those working at food outlets, also known as airport concession workers. The union, representing more than 200 workers, says 80% are women, many of them immigrants.
A lot of them work two jobs, because they can't make enough working a full-time job at one company. A lot of them almost sleep at the airport pretty well, and they just roll into their next job.
The workers are employed by SSP Canada, which operates 31 of the 41 food and beverage outlets at YVR. Today, 11 out of SSP's 13 locations at YVR are closed as a result of the strike.
There were negotiations up until yesterday. They did break off. There's a lot of frustration on the part of the workers about the level of how far the negotiations have proceeded.
In a statement, SSP Canada says it has negotiated in good faith, and it hopes that parties can successfully conclude the negotiations as soon as possible. But workers like Elisa Richard are not convinced with what's being offered.
I work 8 hours a day. I'm speed walking constantly. Sometimes I can't even get a sip of water because I'm serving my guests. It's the highest turnover rate you could possibly imagine.
But this is not the first job action the Vancouver Airport has seen in recent times. About 200 workers from 2 YVR hotels in Richmond have been on strike since last year, demanding better wages. And workers at another hotel in the area, Radisson Blu Vancouver Airport, have been on strike even longer, since May 2021. These striking workers are calling on YVR to do more for airport workers.
Airport concession workers are some of those lowest earning workers at the airport. And we think it's time for them to expand that policy so more workers are covered.
The airport authority says it doesn't play a role in the negotiations, but it encourages both sides to get back to the bargaining table. The striking workers say they look forward to returning to negotiation and will plan future job action if the demands are not met. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Vancouver International Airport.
Another potential strike by WestJet mechanics, meanwhile, has been averted just ahead of the Canada Day long weekend. Federal Labour Minister Seamus O'Regan has imposed binding arbitration to resolve outstanding issues between the airline and the union. Ahead of possible job action, WestJet cancelled 25 flights. The company says no more flights will be scrubbed right now. The union says it will comply with the minister's order. A report from a trade union group argues BC's construction sector is too reliant on temporary foreign workers. It says that's bad for local workers' wages and the rights of those who work from abroad. As Liam Britton explains, one foreign worker here in Vancouver echoes the call for more rights and a chance to become Canadian.
Temporary foreign worker Paul Velis came to Canada to build homes and a better life.
It's a lot of stress, for sure. Because honestly, I like being here. I like doing carpentry. And I believe this country needs carpenters.
He was formerly on what's called a closed permit. That meant he had to keep his job with one employer or risk being forced from Canada. So he put up with what he called bad things.
I suffer economical abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, and pretty much all the abuses you can imagine.
He has a new job and an open permit now, but wishes he had the opportunity to become a Canadian resident.
A clear path to permanent residency or citizenship for sure will be like stress relief for all temporary foreign workers, I would say.
Now, a new report argues that BC is going to need 52,000 more construction workers by 2032, and about 30% of them will need to come from abroad. The problem is, Canada's immigration system isn't bringing enough of those workers in, and those who are brought in tend to be temporary foreign workers who are precarious with fewer protections.
The report is from the BC Building Trades Council, a trade union group. It argues employers are over-relying on temporary foreign workers, and that hurts local and foreign workers in the process.
They're able to bring in temporary labor at less than sort of market wages, bring down wages across the industry in BC. And at the same time, those migrant workers who are coming into our country as temporary foreign workers, they're being denied sort of the employment rights and protections that workers here should have.
Migrant workers advocate Raul Gatica says violations of these workers' rights is common because their job keeps them in Canada.
For example, the employer repeat them constantly to don't submit any complaint for work and compensation. For example, if they get a work accident, they don't have to say anything. They just have to be quiet and don't say anything. Otherwise, they will lose the job.
The Trades Council says the federal and provincial governments should bring in more foreign workers with a path to residency. And they want 2 foreign worker programs audited and to pause entry into construction jobs until that closer look happens.
I think that we need to be very cautious about seriously considering these proposals.
This economist argues temporary workers are needed to help build housing, although there could be reforms.
Those are the things that we should be talking about rather than restricting the ability of companies that need workers in the trades to actually bring those workers in, given that we are not training enough people in this country.
Canada's Immigration Ministry says Ottawa is working to improve compliance with terms of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, adding over 50,000 skilled tradespeople across the country have become permanent residents over the last 5 years. And there are some avenues for temporary workers to pursue residency. Victoria says it is using its provincial nominee program to pursue immigrants in 35 construction and trades occupations for permanent residency. Velis hopes one of those paths to permanent residency is in the cards for him as he continues to build his bond with this country. Liam Britton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Transit Police says its crackdown on drivers misusing bus lanes led them to writing 300 violation tickets over 4 days. The blitz was held in 5 Metro Vancouver cities over the past 2 weeks. Police says it was prompted to crack down after complaints from bus drivers and the public on social media. The force says it also took 2 impaired drivers off the road during peak hours on one day. Transit Police is urging all BC drivers to review the rules for bus lanes. Langford City Hall is now closed after what the city says is a major flood. It was caused by a burst pipe, causing serious damage and affecting a big portion of that building. City officials say they'll update the public by midday Friday about when the building will reopen. They remind taxpayers, even with City Hall closed, property taxes are still due July 2nd. They encourage people to pay with online banking or other methods. A Chilcotin ranch has now been fined over $500,000 for, quote, major habitat destruction along the Chilcotin and Clean rivers. Fisheries and Oceans Canada found Arthur and Schellenberg Cattle Company and a hired contractor modified the riverbanks for agricultural use between 2017 and 2020. Those modifications include devegetation of the riverbank, stream diversion, and fish passage obstruction. The majority of the fine will go to conserve salmon populations found on those rivers. Former federal defense minister and Vancouver MP Harjit Sajjan is denying a media report suggesting he pressured the Canadian military to rescue a group of Afghan Sikhs from Kabul as the city fell to the Taliban 3 years ago. As Ashley Burke reports, Sajjan, who is Sikh, says he never ordered commanders to prioritize Sikhs over others with more direct links to Canada.
It was total chaos in Kabul. In August 2021, thousands of people were trying to escape as Afghanistan fell to the Taliban. Canada's special forces were on the ground amid this scramble, trying to evacuate as many Canadian citizens as possible and those who helped Canada. But today, the Globe and Mail reported the defense minister at the time directed the military to help rescue more than 200 Afghan Sikhs, further down on the priority list.
Let me address the Globe article quite directly, because I'll be honest with you, it was utter BS.
Harjit Sajjan, now the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, says he did direct military to help these Sikhs and provided the military information about their whereabouts from an NGO trying to get them out. But Sajjan says he never pressured the forces to put the Sikh group ahead of Canadians.
It was an approved government policy to safely evacuate as many vulnerable Afghans as possible, which included obviously Canadians first, those who worked with us, like our interpreters. And it also included vulnerable Afghans, which included religious minorities like the Afghan Sikhs and Hindus.
He thinks the reason any of this is even an issue is because he himself is Sikh.
I'll be honest with you, I didn't think I would be getting those questions if I wasn't wearing a turban. I've rarely ever even talked about racism and what it actually meant. But I'll be honest with you, it needs to be called out.
NGOs helping the Sikh group that was stuck in Afghanistan says they were approved by the government to come to Canada, and in the end, the Canadian military didn't reach them in time to get them out.
These are minority communities who are facing a dire threat from the Islamic State and had already been the focus of suicide attacks, targeted killings. These were the most vulnerable of the Afghan minorities.
That group says they saw no sign of favoritism, but the Globe and Mail says it spoke to sources who say there was anger on the ground that the special forces had to divert time and resources to try and help the Sikh group because of the minister's direction. They called it a logistical nightmare at a time when they were still trying to get Canadians home. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
BC Hydro is now offering up to $10,000 to homeowners who are looking to install solar panels on their rooftops. The utility says the rebate program will be available next month, but Hydro has to approve any equipment first. It plans to expand the program for apartment buildings, small businesses, social housing, and Indigenous communities with rebates up to $150,000. A policy advisor with Sustainable Energy BC Association says it's a good pilot, but there's more work to be done.
Putting solar on roofs is probably a relatively small part of the overall problem of electrifying power supply that BC Hydro is experiencing.
Hydro says the program will make it easier for people and businesses to generate their own electricity, lower costs, and deliver clean energy back to the grid. The province has also announced $700 million in energy efficiency programs over the next 3 years. Despite the rain in May and June and plenty today, the province's emergency management minister says northeastern BC is still facing a severe drought as we head deeper into summer.
We have already seen some new fire starts due to lightning throughout the Prince George fire region. There are currently 93 wildfires burning across BC, and the majority of them are in the northwest region of the province. But fortunately, none are considered wildfires of note. And fortunately, there are no evacuation alerts or evacuation orders currently in place due to wildfire.
Darius Mandavi joins us now for a first look at the weather. And what are you watching around drought?
So for once, I've been here for almost a year, Dan. This is the first time I get to bring good drought news. It's tempered good news.
It's been a while.
I know.
Yeah.
It's tempered good news, but it is good news. You can see some improvement, even just compared to last week. You can see parts of the Northeast dropping out of level 4 and 5 drought for the first time in going on 2 years now. Fall 2022 is the last time, other than a very brief period at the beginning of the 2023 season before drought levels jump back up again, where we've seen the Northeast out of drought level 4 and 5. And it's not just there, really across the province, we do still have pretty bad drought conditions. As you can see here, this is right now. Compared to last year, though, things are a little bit better and things are continuing to improve. Just take a look at this visual of the Fraser River from just a couple months ago, and you can see how low those levels are, people walking on the riverbed. But if we compare that to what things are looking like now, just a couple months later with some good rainfall, levels way back up once again. So some real improvement. It's really good news. We're not out of the woods yet. We're entering the drier summer months still. But that little bit of major rainfall events that happened in June have been a big help across the province, especially up in the Northeast. Now, in terms of the fire danger, that does mean that we're at a slightly lower baseline now in the Northeast, but again, doesn't mean we're out of the woods. Fire danger is still high in parts of the Northeast, between moderate and high, and we're going to continue to see sort of fluctuations here. So even though, again, out of drought level 5 up here in the far Northeast, 4 and 5, we're going to continue to see elevated fire danger when we get these warmer, drier periods, which is what we're seem to be heading into, at least up in the northeast over the next few days. Now, for now, there's still a little bit of precipitation happening in parts of the central and northern interior, bit of heavy downpours in a few spots with a few lightning strikes. Down the southern interior, also a little bit of precipitation, but not nearly as much activity as we had yesterday. That rainfall warning is for Alberta, not here in BC, and here on the south coast as well. Some precipitation lingering, but mostly clearing up into tomorrow, Dan. So some more sun on the way.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Darius.
Thank you.
The NHL Awards took place in Las Vegas earlier in the day, and two local boys picked up some nice hardware. Canucks captain Quinn Hughes won the James Norris Memorial Trophy as the league's best defenseman. The 24-year-old is the first Canuck to win that title, and North Vancouver native Connor Bedard was named Rookie of the Year, despite missing a chunk of the season with a broken jaw. Bedard was picked #1 overall in the 2023 NHL Draft. After the break, we dive into our archives, taking a look at the groundbreaking group that led the fight for gay rights in Vancouver. Stick around. It is Throwback Thursday, and that means it's time to dive into our vast CBC archives. The Gay Alliance Toward Equality, also known as GATE, formed here in Vancouver in 1971, one of the first gay liberation groups in Canada. It fought for the rights of LGBTQ plus people, launching campaigns against the Vancouver Sun, the BC Human Rights Commission, and the Supreme Court of Canada. Take a look at this story from our archives from July 1979, where the group called a news conference to highlight the violence against the gay community.
The Gay Alliance Towards Equality called a news conference to outline a series of violent incidents they claim occurred against gays during the recent Sea Festival. 3 members of the group told reporters that on a number of occasions, gays and lesbians were subjected to verbal abuse, physical violence, and gang assaults. This was one example.
And we noticed about a gang of 14, 15 people in a parking lot, and we pulled in to see what was going on. And when we got out of our car, they seemed to be supremely beating 2 people. We approached to help and step in, as no one else seemed to have, and managed to get one of the people away, and that person disappeared right away. And then there was one person who was being severely beaten. Like, once the fight was over, you couldn't even identify his face.
Don Hen, GATE spokesman, says this wave of violence stems from the social hatred of homosexuals that he claims has been deepened by the anti-gay attitude of City Hall and the police department. Han also accused the police of entrapment by spying on them when they meet on the beach at English Bay, and then lay charges ranging from loitering to gross indecency. Han says his group will hold a rally next week in the West End to determine how gays in the city can defend themselves more effectively. He indicated they will in future take a much harder line.
The point behind this is that we want to pressure officials, we want to pressure governments, we want to pressure institutions into recognizing that we exist, that we experience repression, that we want equality in this society, and we want protection from the violence that we as a minority group endure. And that is the point of every demonstration. We intend, as we have been doing for the last decade, coming out of the closet, saying we are here, we are visible, and we will fight back. We will not sit silently and passively anymore as we have done for decades because of the severity of the oppression. And that time is now.
It appears the confrontation between the gay community, City Council, the police, and the straight people is again about to come to a head. Bob Gillingham, CBC News, Vancouver.
And we are now joined by Don Hen. He is a gay rights activist, one of the key members of GATE, as you saw, joining in 1973, and speaking in that story, as you just saw. Don, thanks for being here. What goes through your mind when you see that story at the time?
Well, I'm thrown back to that decade and reminded of how difficult things were in the 1970s, that there was hostility everywhere, all over, from every institution, from the state, from churches, and a ubiquitous ignorance about homosexuality as an ordinary form of human desire. And it reminds me of, the 10 years, which began really with Stonewall, but in Canada with 1971, a national demonstration for legal recognition, legal rights, and equality. Sometimes while you're in the midst of that kind of struggle, it's not too long after that you realize what you were actually up against.
Yeah. And in the 9 years that GATE was active, what kind of campaigning did you do to advocate against discrimination against the LGBTQ plus community?
Well, GATE had a very sophisticated and well-developed set of strategies and programs. We would intervene in provincial and federal elections, demand that politicians make public statements in support of us. None of them would in the early 70s. The first one was Rosemary Brown. She was the only elected official in Canada who would support us. So we did that. We fought discrimination cases. In 1971, we wanted to rent the room from the Y for our AGM. The Y said, no, we don't rent to homosexuals. We went to the Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission said we have no law that we can use to assist you or being help to you. So that kind of discrimination went on, and they wanted to print a leaflet with a publisher. No, you're homosexuals. We don't print fag leaflets. And then the big one, of course, was the Vancouver Sun, which refused a 3-line ad, 6 issues, $2.50, Gay Tide. And that fight went on for 6 years. The ad was submitted in late 1973. We went through the judicial system, the program, and finally ended up in the Supreme Court of Canada on October the 5th, 1978. Technically, we lost, but the dissenting opinion was written by Chief Justice Bora Laskin, with 3 other justices concurring, and it was a political victory.
If I can ask you, appreciate your time, how much progress do you think you've made in that time since, looking at today?
I think the progress has been enormous. It's been huge. I was saying to one of your reporters a little while ago, when in 1971, we had no idea, either in Canada or the U.S. or Western Europe, how long this was going to take. Would it take 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years? We had no idea. It was just, but because the movement grew so massively, millions of people came out of the closets and they identified as gay. And so it mushroomed across the Western world.
Don Hen, I'm so sorry we have to cut this short. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
The Crown asked for 18 months. The judge deciding the case of a mom who faked Inuit identity went much further. Why she was sentenced to 3 years behind bars after this. An Ontario woman who defrauded Inuit organizations of nearly $160,000 to get her twin daughter's Inuit status is heading to federal prison. Karima Mani was sentenced today in Iqaluit to 3 years behind bars. It's believed to be the first conviction of Indigenous identity theft in Canada. Juanita Taylor has covered the case from the start and has more in today's sentence.
Judge Mia Minocchio told the courtroom that the appropriation of Indigenous identity must be denounced in the strongest terms, and that Karima Mani's case must serve as a signal to any future Indigenous pretenders that they too will face significant penalties. The courtroom was packed today when Mani learned she will be serving 36 months in a federal prison, more than what the Crown was asking for, which was an 18-month sentence. Justice Minocchio said that the true victims of this crime are the Inuit of Nunavut. She says Miss Mani has defrauded the Inuit of Nunavut by stealing their identity and calling this crime an egregious example of the exploitation of Indigenous peoples. The judge considered Mani's early guilty plea in this case, but she couldn't ignore Mani's previous fraud conviction, stealing over $800,000 from her former employer, the March of Dimes, and calling Mani a persistent fraudster. Iqaluit civil lawyer Ann Crawford says this Nunavut case is already setting a precedent.
To have a conviction for Indigenous identity theft is going to be talked about not just in criminal circles, but in boardrooms, and in foundations where they're giving out educational money, and in the programming of the Government of Canada and provinces and territories. I'm sure that this is going to be a case that echoes.
The judge also noted that the other victims in this are Mani's twin daughters. In this case, Justice Minocchio says Mani has victimized her twins, whose lives and careers have been severely compromised by her fraud. Mani told the court this week she is deeply sorry and said she hopes that by pleading guilty, repaying the funds, and apologizing, she's taken a step in correcting the harm she caused. Juanita Taylor, CBC News, Rankin Inlet, Nunavut.
Governor General Mary Simon has announced 83 new appointments to the Order of Canada. They include trailblazing athletes, academics, and billboard-charting performers. As Olivia Stefanovich reports, they're being recognized for inspiring generations of Canadians.
From a small-town Canadian girl turned global rock star Avril Lavigne, to prolific singer-songwriter Danielle Lavoie, Canadian cultural icons are being recognized by Rideau Hall, joining a list of 83 new recipients to one of the country's highest honors.
When I first got the news, I was absolutely shocked.
Nice feed across the ice, shot, goal, Jim Kite.
Jim Kite was the first deaf player in NHL history. Now he's being inducted into the Order of Canada after decades championing the rights of athletes with physical disabilities.
There's so many people that told me that I could not do certain things because of my hearing impairment. Or my background or whatever. And I just had a little voice inside me say, oh yeah, just watch me.
Solomon Rat also being celebrated for preserving and revitalizing the Cree language.
I started teaching in 1984. And at that time, very few elementary schools or high schools were teaching the language.
The white dialect, A.
Rat went on to develop the first bachelor's degree in Cree at the First Nations University of Canada.
Young adults wanted to learn about their culture.
The significance is still sinking in for Bill Jansen, a Mennonite leader instrumental in the creation of the private sponsorship of refugees program.
There was a feeling we have to do something.
Mobilizing Canadians to support those forced to flee their country.
It just resonated with the people of Canada in a deep way.
Jansen helped thousands find a new home here, a country now saying thanks by honoring his efforts. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
New research is shedding light on why some people sailed through the pandemic without being infected by COVID-19, while others did not. Christine Birak takes a look at a study from the UK that's offering up fresh genetic clues.
Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've known not everyone who breathes in this coronavirus gets sick. Scientists now think they might know why. Based on a unique trial that involved infecting healthy volunteers with the virus, researchers found a gene that's highly active in people who never seem to get COVID.
This gene is in the family of genes that our body uses to show our immune system bits of pathogens. But the function of this gene is still undiscovered.
In a world's first challenge trial done at the height of the pandemic, UK researchers infected dozens of healthy, unvaccinated adults with a low dose of the original coronavirus. Then they closely tracked how long it took their immune system to kick in. In those who never became infected, researchers saw high levels of activity in a specific gene called HLA-DQA2. Scientists think it helps flag viral invaders to the immune system so fast it destroys them before they can replicate.
So what I think is going to happen now is you're going to have researchers all over the world buckling down and learning about this.
Researchers at McGill have also been collecting cells from people who've never had COVID, searching for a link.
It puts an anchor in the ground and says, we got to look at this and everything around it. So that's how major discoveries are made. But it doesn't mean that the work is finished.
While the virus has changed and vaccines, along with infections, have already shown our bodies pieces of this coronavirus, scientists say this new gene discovery could help invent new vaccines that prompt an even quicker immune response to COVID and possibly other respiratory viruses too. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
Coming up, we visit a Camloops school where the students have built a program that has cut their school's waste in half. We'll tell you how they did it after this. A group of grade 7 students at a Camloops elementary school have built a compost pilot project. They say they've cut the amount of garbage their school throws out in half. Have a look.
All right, well, it all started when our teachers made us watch some Zooms about climate action projects in order to benefit the environment. Then the 2 grade 7 classes each came up with their own project of their own. And we voted on which one we thought was best, and one of ours was chosen. Well, we started off with the garbage bins, and as we got the program up and running, we asked our janitor, like, how much do we actually go through? And she told us we go through about 17 big bags of garbage per day. And the dumpster we have, like at the back of the school, is full to the brim. And so we were like, that's a lot of garbage. And every day we wheel it out of the boys or girls' washrooms in order to start our pickup. We're not gonna be able to fill this one up too much, but we're gonna try. So we now have our bin, and this is where we sometimes will check how full these ones are in case we can, fill them more. And then we'll start circulating the school. So we're just gonna head down to the class at the end in order to pick up their compost bins. So we're gonna go into the classroom here.
It feels really good that our whole group is so young and that we're already starting to make a difference in our school. Hopefully this isn't just a one and done thing. Hopefully it can carry on and throughout Kamloops.
I've got the compost bin here. So this is the little bin that we put into this big one here. It means a lot. It's really a great experience of helping our community out.
I think we hear a lot of negative things about climate in our community, and it worries kids sometimes, so having them empowered to start something, own it, have it their idea, and feel empowered to actually make a change and leave a bit of a legacy is a very powerful learning tool for students.
It feels really good to start something like this. The best way to relieve climate anxiety is to take action. It feels good to take action and have a big impact on our school.
Good for them, Dorius. I love that.
Yeah,
awesome.
half the waste. That's
Half the waste.
impressive.
Very good.
Yeah.
What do they get for weather?
Well, they're going to get a little bit of sunshine tomorrow, but just a couple hours of it. Kamloops is quite a bit sunnier than us here on the coast. Here we get a little break in the cloud tomorrow, mostly in the afternoon. Other times it'll be a little bit later in the clouds. You'll see some lightening up, but still decent amount of cloud cover, both in the morning, early morning at least, and then also in the evening overnight time. Some more precipitation may make its way to Vancouver sort of late Saturday into Sunday, most of those overnight hours. For now, it's hard to say exactly when that precipitation arrives. If it will arrive, the models are in disarray, shall we say. So we'll have a better picture of that tomorrow probably, but for now, it may be a little bit wet on Saturday, but mostly towards the end of the day and into the evening is what it looks like right now, if we even do get those showers, mostly on the North Shore, I'd say. If we take a look across the province, though, some more of that convective activity popping up tomorrow, and then even some heavier showers in some places. Then that next system moves onshore, but doesn't break into the interior too much, mostly affecting the central coast, maybe northern parts of the island, but even there, not too much at all. And then across the province, it's a fairly dry weekend that we're heading into. Should be plenty of sunshine for many folks. In terms of the temperatures across the province, a little bit of everything across the board. Temperatures coming up a little bit more from our quite chilly day here on the coast tomorrow. Pretty similar for the next few weeks, for the next week or so here on the coast. For parts of the interior, fluctuating, but no more than 5 to 7 degrees or so over several days. So not too much variation, hovering at least close to seasonal. In terms of conditions across the province, lots of sunshine tomorrow in those afternoon, evening hours. We may see some of those convective storms pop up, but not expecting too much activity tomorrow, just a few of those odd showers, really. And if we take a look at our 5-day forecast here in Metro Vancouver, we do have a mostly cloudy day tomorrow, except for that slight break in the afternoon, evening, and then maybe a rainier day Saturday, but hard to say.
Okay, thanks, Darius.
Thank you.
Coming up, we've got a pup date. 10 days after this sea otter pup was rescued by the Vancouver Aquarium, they're looking for ideas on a name for her. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
CBC returns as a media partner of the Surrey Fusion Festival, July 20th to the 21st. The festival features over 50 cultural pavilions that will incorporate the theme of landmarks of the world into their displays. For more information, visit surreyfusionfestival.ca. And never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter and keep connected with us.
Ten days after it arrived, a sea otter pup is on the mend at the Vancouver Aquarium Marine Mammal Rescue Society.
They're starting to get into it, which is awesome, good signs. Yeah, get head shakes.
And she's making noises. She's under 24-hour care there, and they hope to eventually release her back into the wild when she's able to take care of herself.
The Rescue Society is planning a vote to decide on a name within the next few days. So stay tuned.
Your name choice?
I don't know. It's too cute. I can't think.
Maud. Done. Easy. Hey, and then there's Maud. Some of you will get that.
Not me. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
Tanya Fletcher will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National, and she'll be your host here at 6 p.m. tomorrow and all next week. We'll see you after that. Good night.